Get that old woman away from my table. She shouldn't even be here. I can still hear her voice, cold, dry, sharp like a slap in the face. That night, I felt everything I had once believed in start to crumble. Sitting at the other end of the long family table, I held in my wrinkled hands a small gift box for my grandson, Oliver. Inside was a sweater I had knitted for weeks. It was his birthday, and I foolishly believed he would be happy to see his grandmother. But it was my daughter-in-law, Emily, who greeted me at the door, looking down on me as if I were a stranger in the house my late husband had built with his own hands. At first, I didn't understand. Her words stung humiliating, cutting. The guests fell silent. Even my son, Daniel, sitting beside her, didn't say a word. He lowered his gaze as though he didn't recognize the woman who had raised him. I stood up, my throat tight with emotion, and left the room under the watchful eyes of the guests. The front door slammed behind me, and the cold winter air of the city hit my face, red from the shame. Returning to my small room alone, I placed the sweater on the dresser. The scent of the wool and my tears lingered on it. For the first time in a long while, I felt something stir within me, like a smoldering ember beneath the ashes. That night, I knew I could no longer remain silent. Silence could become a weapon. I will tell you everything. But to those of you listening, take a moment and tell me where you are from, which city or village, in Algeria or elsewhere, and please don't hesitate to share your story. I always read your words. They keep me company during my long, lonely nights. As the car took me home that night, the city passed by outside the window neon lights in the city center, terraces still lively despite the cold, and the dark alleys where I had grown up. I remembered another time, a time when I was young, full of hope, believing that a woman's sacrifices would always be rewarded. I was wrong. Arriving home in my small apartment on the third floor of a dilapidated building, I removed my coat and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The face staring back seemed unfamiliar, as if the old woman before me had no connection to the young bride I once was, the one who had given everything for her home, for her husband, Andrew, and for her son, Daniel. I sat on the bed, the sweater still on my lap, and cried. Not out of anger, not yet, but from a heavy, muted sorrow. I thought of Andrew. If he had been here, he would never have let me be treated like this. But he had been gone for 15 years, leaving me alone, facing relatives who had become strangers. I thought of Danielth's son for whom I had struggled, prayed, sacrificed so much, and of Emily, this arrogant daughter-in-law who had taken over his life and erased mine. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I opened the window. A pale ray of sunlight bathed the courtyard, and I felt that ember still burning deep within me. Something had changed inside me. It was no longer just sadness. It was a promise. The promise that no one would ever trample on me again. And that was when my story truly began. I still remember the early days before everything changed. Before coldness and contempt devoured everything I had built. I was just 18 when Andrew asked for my hand. At the time, in our neighborhood, he was a respected young man. He worked in construction, strong, his forehead already marked by the dust of the job. One morning at the market, while I was carrying a basket of vegetables, He smiled at me, a genuine, honest smile that melted my shyness in an instant. From that day on, he courted me with unexpected delicacy. Our wedding was modest but joyful. The town hall was decorated with white flowers, and I wore a dress sewn by my own mother. In Andrew's eyes, I saw a glimmer of pride, and in my parents' eyes, a shadow of relief. I was in good hands. He promised me a life better than the one I had known, a life where I would want for nothing, where our children would grow up safely, and I believed him with all my heart. The first few years were beautiful, simple. We saved every penny to buy a small plot of land. I worked as a seamstress at home while Andrew built our house. Stone by stone, night after night, I still remember the first night in our home. There was no electricity yet. We lit candles and spread an old rug on the bare floor. We shared a simple meal of bread, olives, and cheese, but it was our home. And in the flickering light, he took my hand and said, "Here, we will be happy." And we were. Daniel was born 2 years later. I still see his little face, peacefully asleep in my arms, the warmth of his tiny body. Andrew was a loving father, always the first to get up at night to calm his cries, always ready to make him wooden toys. We were poor, but we had something else, a tenderness that I thought would never end. The years passed, marked by work, sweat, children's laughter in the yard, and family meals on Fridays. We watched our house take shape, room by room. We invested in a small store, which I helped run as Daniel grew. He had eyes as dark and bright as his father's. I remember those first days of school, the awkward drawings I proudly hung on the walls. Every night, I silently prayed for him, hoping he would have a life better than ours. Then Andrew fell ill, struck by terminal cancer. I cared for him day and night, refusing to leave him alone in that cold, white hospital room. He passed away one morning just before dawn, while I had my head on his shoulder. That day, a part of me died with him, but I didn't let myself be defeated. I took up the mantle alone. I ran the store. I continued paying for Daniel's education and kept up the house. I told myself that if I held on, he would one day be grateful and see all I had sacrificed. When Daniel met Emily, I welcomed her with open arms. She seemed sweet, polite. Daniel seemed happy, and that was all that mattered to me. I even arranged their wedding, paid for the caterer, sewed her wedding dress, and gave Daniel the wedding rings with my savings. I remember the joy in his eyes that day, and I believed I had done right, that my place would remain beside him even after he started his own family. I was wrong. Today, when I think back to those youthful years, I feel a mix of bitterness and nostalgia. These memories are like tarnished jewels. They still shine under the dust of the years, but the pain has dulled their brilliance. I loved, gave, and sacrificed for them. I stayed silent because it was the norm, because I was a woman, a mother, and that's what was expected of me. Yet, in silence, something in me began to crack. Over time, the small wounds became deep scars. As Emily took her place in the house, mine seemed to shrink. At first, it was veiled remarks, polite but sour smiles. "You shouldn't bother coming over so often, Laura. You're old now." Or, "Let the younger ones handle the kitchen." rest. But these words hid something deeper, an insidious plan to push me to the margins, to erase me gently. Daniel looked away, as if he didn't see or didn't want to see. He told me I was imagining things, that I was exaggerating. So I learned to be silent, to swallow my pain. After all, he was my son. I didn't want to be the one to create conflict in his marriage. I still believed that if I showed patience and discretion, things would eventually get better. But the humiliations became harder to bear. Family meals became a torment. I was always placed at the end of the table, far from the conversation, next to an empty chair or an uninvited guest. I cooked dishes I knew Daniel liked, but Emily barely tasted them, preferring to order more refined meals from the caterer. And when Oliver, my grandson, came to me with his loving eyes, she quickly called him away with a sharp tone. "Don't dirty your clothes. Go play elsewhere." I could feel Emily's constant disdain in her eyes, a look that said, "You're useless now, just a burden." She inspected my clothes, always simple, my hair without aftercare, as if every detail confirmed her judgment. Daniel said nothing. Sometimes he would give me a guilty smile when our eyes met, but he didn't say anything. I could tell he was torn between two fires, but that silence hurt me more than Emily's words. Even in my own home, the one Andrew and I had built, I no longer felt at home. When I came to help prepare for a celebration, I saw Emily packing my things into plastic bags, storing them in a corner as if to signal that I was a nuisance. More than once, I overheard whispers behind closed doors, harsh words like blows. She still tried to dominate our lives, and yet I kept going. I knitted for Oliver. I cooked Daniel's favorite dishes when he came to visit. I kept my tears for the night, alone in my apartment. I refused to show my pain because in my generation, that's how it was. A mother had to endure. A woman had to bear it. But deep down, something was dying inside me. I no longer recognized myself. I felt like a shadow, condemned to slide along the walls without making a sound. Each day, I woke up a little more tired, a little more resigned. I no longer had a place in their lives. Even Oliver began repeating his mother's words. One evening, he said to me, laughing without malicious intent, "Mom says you're poor and don't understand anything." I forced myself to smile, but a part of me broke that night. Poor, ignorant, that's how she saw me. The one who had given her youth, her strength to build this home, who had known sweat, hunger, and sacrifice to give them a better life. I felt the shame and the rage mixing in my chest, and yet I stayed silent, still afraid to lose what little I had left the presence of my son, my grandson, afraid of breaking the last ties that bound me to them. I told myself to be patient a little longer, Laura. Maybe one day they'll understand. Maybe one day Daniel will open his eyes. But each visit cost me more. I came home with a heavy heart, feeling like a stranger in my own family. And at night, in my cold bed, I thought of Andrew, his smile, his calloused hand on mine, his words full of tenderness. He alone would have known how to defend me, but he was no longer there. Then, one evening, everything changed. I had planned nothing. It was fate, or perhaps chance, that put the truth in my hands. It was a Tuesday in January. It was cold. I had gone to Daniel's house with a bag of warm pastries for Oliver. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. The door was slightly ajar, so I entered. The house was empty, silent. I turned to leave when a piece of white paper on the counter caught my eye. It was a document, half slipped out of a folder. My name was written in bold letters. Termination of usage rights in favor of Daniel and his wife, Emily. I read and reread the lines, my heart racing. It clearly stated that they were requesting the removal of my rights to the family house, the one I had built stone by stone with Andrew, to transfer it fully into their names, as if I no longer existed, as if I had never lived there, as if all my sacrifices meant nothing. I placed the paper down, my hands shaking, and suddenly I understood everything, the whispers, the evasive glances, the snide remarks. It wasn't just to hurt me. They were preparing their move. They wanted to strip me of the only thing I had left, my house. They had already submitted a request to the notary. I left the house quietly, closing the door behind me. In the cold street, under the dim streetlights, I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could he? How could Daniel, my own son, let this happen? When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, thinking. My thoughts were swirling, but this time, I didn't cry. No. I felt the embers still burning inside me, a cold but calm anger. He thought he could deceive me. He thought I was too old, too weak to understand. He thought I would sign with my eyes closed, that I would leave without a word, without asking for anything. That night, in my small room, I made a decision. I wouldn't say anything. Not yet. I wouldn't show that I knew. I would play their game. I would keep smiling, bringing pastries to Oliver, staying silent during their humiliations. But I would start preparing my move too. The next morning, I got up early. I had a coffee at the old bistro downstairs, then took a taxi to the city center to see Master Benaiah, a notary who had known my husband. I hadn't been to his office in years. He received me courteously, a little surprised to see me. I calmly explained the situation and showed him what I had read. His face turned pale as he looked over the documents already filed by Daniel and Emily. Laura, they can't do this without your signature. For now, you are still the rightful owner, but you need to act fast. I nodded. I want you to prepare everything. I want to protect my rights, and I want everything to be legal, flawless. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled almost with respect. Very well, Laura. We'll show them that you are not so weak. Leaving his office, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had regained my dignity. I knew they would continue to despise me, that they would pursue their plans, thinking I didn't see anything. But now, I held the cards, and in the shadows, I prepared with patience and determination, because now I knew that silence could be a form of justice. The following weeks were the longest of my life. I chose to remain discreet, to let nothing show. Every time I visited Daniel and Emily, I played my role. I smiled politely. I took my place at the end of the table. I left small gifts for Oliver. In their arrogance, they had no idea. They still believed the old Laura didn't understand. But in reality, I was taking note of everything. I noticed their knowing glances when the house was mentioned. I saw the paperwork being hastily hidden when I entered the room. I took note of every detail, and every evening I wrote everything down in a notebook. Meanwhile, Master Benaiah was making progress behind the scenes. He had started procedures to secure my property rights and to prepare, if necessary, a quick sale to a buyer he knew. He explained that Algerian law protected widowed property owners, but warned that I needed to be cautious of forgeries and coerced signatures. I trusted him, and I made another decision. I would prepare to cut ties, definitively. I knew selling the house and moving far away would break my heart. After all, this house had been Andrew's dream, the stage of my entire life. But I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me expelled like an intruder. If they wanted to erase me, I would do it my way. I would hold my head high. One morning in March, I woke up very early and went to the notary's office. That day, I signed the papers for the sale. The buyers were a lovely couple without children, who promised to preserve the house's memory. In exchange, I received more than enough to start over elsewhere, to buy a small, peaceful apartment by the sea in Tapaza. When I placed my pen on the table, I felt a strange peace, as though I had turned a painful page. In the following days, everything accelerated. I found a place to live, packed my belongings into boxes, and made sure to send a registered letter to Daniel and Emily to officially inform them of the sale. No more words, no explanations, just the effect. The following Saturday, I went to the house one last time. It was empty. The walls echoed with old memories, and I took my time walking through each room, caressing the wood of the doors, stopping at the living room window to take in the familiar view. Then I closed the door behind me without looking back. I took a taxi that was waiting for me. As I passed their building to symbolically hand over the keys to what they thought was already theirs, I saw their shock through the window. Daniel held the letter in his hands, pale. Emily glared at me with anger and confusion. I didn't say a word. I owed them nothing. My revenge was in this silence. When I arrived in Tapaza, I stepped out of the taxi facing the sea. A light breeze carried the scent of salt, and the sky had already taken on the colors of dusk. I entered my new, modest but bright apartment and opened the windows wide to let in the sea air. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free from them, free from their humiliations, free from their schemes. And I had done it all without a fuss, without raising my voice, just by using the law and my own quiet strength. For true revenge does not shout. It is built patiently in the shadows and strikes when you least expect it.